Hello world, it's Birdo Prey 5, Qapla. So early this morning I watched Star Trek Picard Episode 7 titled Nepenthe, which was the name of the planet Picard and Soji were sent to via the spatial trajector at the end of last week's episode. We knew from Rios' comments in the preview for this episode last week that Nepenthe is several days away from the Borg cube at maximum warp. This episode is rich in nostalgia because it features Riker and Troi, though Marina Sirtis didn't get any love in the opening credits. Only Jonathan Frakes was listed as a guest star. I blame the patriarchy. When this episode ends, you may think it was a good episode. Seeing the three of them back together again and the touching goodbye at the end is a high note. However, the moment you think about any scene, it all falls apart. To put it bluntly, this is a bad episode. In fact, it's the worst episode to date by far, in my opinion. While a bad episode can be forgiven, if this is what the rest of the season holds, the series is in real danger. Nepenthe is 59 minutes long, including the recap and previews for next week, which is over 3 minutes longer than last week, and almost 14 minutes longer than the average episode. This may well be my longest review. Rather than break down every scene, I'm going to break down the problems, though I'm sure I will miss some. Overall, I'm going to have to give Nepenthe a 4 out of 10. And yes, that does sound low, and it is. I'm going to have to get into spoilers to make my case, though, so be warned. Spoilers are coming. Nepenthe opens to a flashback of only 3 weeks prior. We see the full interaction Dr. Jurati has with Commodore Oh and her ridiculous sunglasses back at the Daystrom Institute. Jurati is hesitant to help Oh at first, but then Oh mind melds with her, shows her some images of Earth being destroyed, and a few random shots of people in pain, with one killing themselves after just a few frames. Jurati is thoroughly convinced to help Oh however she needs. By the way, the suicide counts as another on-screen death, so up to 34 for the season. Oh shows Jurati a blue glowy thing. Before even telling her it's a pill, Jurati puts it in her mouth. The only thing Jurati didn't do was chew it until told. How did she know this was a pill? If a stranger opened their hand to a blue glowy thing, the last thing I'd do is put it in my mouth. Jurati is quite literally blue-pilled on screen. Back on the Borg cube, Narek's sister, whose name I finally looked up, and it's Narissa, or at least that was the name she was known by in Starfleet. It doesn't sound very Romulan to me. Anyway, Narissa is trying to find out where Picard and Soji disappeared to, and she has 8 ex-Borg killed in front of Hugh because he refuses to talk. Narissa says she'd kill Hugh if not for the treaty with the Federation, because Romulans are renowned for following the rules. By the way, we add 8 more to the body count, so now it's 42. Elnor, who has been on the Borg cube the entire time, finally catches up with Hugh, who is still kneeling next to the dead XBs. Where was Elnor 5 minutes ago when he may have been able to stop this? Rios calls Elnor from the La Sirena, which the Romulans purposely let go of the Borg tractor beam. Elnor tells them he's choosing to stay on the cube because it's where he is needed. Rios says the crew says he's crazy for staying, and Jurati adds he's also brave. Elnor seems to change his mission from protecting Picard to protecting Hugh. Raffi warns Rios the Romulans letting them go must be a trick, and Rios says maybe, but they'll still have to catch him. This makes little sense, as a few episodes ago, Rios admits that even the old-style Romulan bird of prey was faster than the La Sirena, so you'd think modern Romulan ships could easily catch him. After the credits, we see the very Earth-like planet of Nepenthe, and the first living creature we see is a fluffy bunny. Oh wait, what's that? A horn? It's a unicorn bunny. Yes, they glued a horn to a rabbit, so we know it's an alien rabbit. I can only imagine this was an intentional callback to the Alpha 177K9 from the original series episode The Enemy Within. The only problem with that is that alien dog is mocked today for just how lazy it was to stick a horn on a dog, even in 1966. To do the same in 2020 is even worse. Unfortunately, this isn't the last we see of the bunnycorn. The lighting for this scene is so bad, though, I didn't even notice the horn on the first viewing. You'd be forgiven for missing it. The camera pans, and Soji and Picard come through the spatial projector onto the planet. The 95-year-old Picard walks through no problem, but the young and synthetic Soji falls to the ground after stepping through. And no, Picard could never have used the technology before. They are almost immediately met by a young teenage girl dressed like a wild woman with her own bunny ears, and with a bow and arrow. So Soji and Picard raise their hands. Picard tells the girl with the bow to aim at his head because his heart is made of solid duratanium, a reference to Picard's artificial heart, but if it was made of solid anything, it couldn't function. Duratanium has been mentioned multiple times throughout Trek as a very strong alloy used in starship hulls, not to be confused with duranium, which is also used in hulls, but not as strong. So Picard knows the girl's name is Kestra. For those who remember their obscure TNG episodes, Kestra was the name of Deanna's older sister who had died when Deanna was just a baby, and we learned about in the Next Generation episode Dark Page. Once Picard mentions the girl's name, she remembers who he is and lowers the weapon. On the walk to Kestra's home, her and Soji talk about Picard as if he isn't even there, though he is keeping several steps behind them. A very awkward scene happens when Kestra asks who Soji's father was, since Soji told Kestra Picard claimed to be a friend of her father. And to answer the question, Picard asks Kestra if she's heard of Commander Data, presumably from stories. Kestra immediately exclaims, "You're an android?" Which comes as a huge shock to Soji. If that wasn't shock enough to her, when Soji starts saying everything in her life is fake, her parents, her dreams, her body, and her sister, Picard stops her and says her sister Daj was real. Soji momentarily gets a glimpse of hope in her eyes, and then Picard delivers the news that Daj is dead. But hey, at least she was real. Kestra brings them to a log cabin in the woods. We see an older Deanna Troi come out to tend to some plants, and she bends over so we can get a cleavage shot. This is just like real Star Trek. We see Riker in the kitchen preparing food. There is absolutely zero technology visible in this kitchen that hasn't been around for at least 50 years. The most advanced item is a dish soap dispenser. Not even some kind of sonic dishwasher. Good old hand soap for the Rikers. You can't visibly see any sign it's the 24th, almost 25th century in the scene or house at all. This is a recurring issue with this series. Riker enjoyed modern comforts. Living off the grid doesn't make much sense, even with the reason will be given later. It's clear they don't have the budget to make a real Trek episode. After embracing Picard, Riker realizes Picard is there to hide out from something, and Riker tells the house to raise the shields and set perimeter scans to max, and the house responds despite there being no apparent technology. Picard says he better add anti-cloaking scans too, and Riker does and deduces Romulans are after Picard. In the meantime, Riker mentions they have been having trouble with the Kzinti. The Kzinti were an aggressive feline humanoid species first introduced in the animated series, but should not be confused with the Caitians, who were also feline humanoids introduced in the animated series, and who will be featured in Star Trek Lower Decks if it ever airs. But the Caitians are generally not considered aggressive. Picard and Riker reminisce about how Riker told Picard he'll be, quote, ass deep in Romulans for the rest of his life if Picard undertook the Romulan supernova rescue, and Riker reminded Picard no good deed goes unpunished, which is extremely out of character for both of these men. I mean, if that is how Riker felt, why ever join Starfleet? In the TNG days, they were doing nothing but good deeds. Troi walks in and casually tells Picard she told his friend how to find the shower, which I guess was a not-so-subtle way of telling Soji she stunk. Welcome to my home. The shower's over there. Troi tells Picard and Riker she can't sense anything from Soji, even though she presents as human and clearly appears to have emotion. Two problems here. First, in the TNG episode Descent Part 2, Troi could sense emotions and data when he had them. Second, why would someone build an android that can fool all medical sensors and scans, but any Beta Z can quickly and easily tell isn't a real person? Picard tells Riker when he left Earth he had a ship, a plan, and a crew, and now he's lost them all. Why is Picard so pessimistic? He had to know it would take days for the La Sirena to reach him on Nepenthe. There's no reason he should be worrying. Troi tells Picard he needs to have a nap, and she'll take him to Thad's room while Will makes dinner. Thad, as we'll find out, is the name of Riker and Troi's son, who has since died, but we'll get into that later. Thad is also not a random name. Thaddeus Riker was a distant ancestor of Will's who fought in the American Civil War, and whose life was saved by a Q. This was presented in the Voyager episode Death Wish. Before Troi takes Picard away, Kestra comes in with a freshly skinned bunnycorn. Yes, a skinned animal complete with unicorn horns still remaining is handed over from Kestra to Will. So much for Riker claiming in the next generation humans had moved beyond eating meat.
You've seen something as fresh and tasty as meat, but inorganically materialized out of patterns used by our transporters.
Why is this kid out hunting for food, for Christ's sake? Why isn't she in school? I'm starting to think Deanna and Will aren't great parents. So we get our first shower scene of the series, but no, apparently it's not in a bathroom. The shower they send Soji to use is outdoors. Are we to believe the entire family showers outdoors? And worse, they are using copper pipes and valves exactly as you'd find in any home improvement store today. This is low tech even by today's standards. Also, another episode where Soji's bare feet are shown. Someone involved definitely has a fetish. Soji showers while Kestra watches close by, uncomfortably close. While Michael Chabon and Alex Kurtzman are quick to claim they put profanity in because they could, because network censors prevented so much when Trek aired on television, they seem very averse to showing any nudity. I guess they don't do everything simply because they can. If you're going to make Star Trek adults only, why stop at language? After the shower, Soji ends up in Kestra's room. Kestra conveniently has a bunk bed, which makes no sense. Her brother had his own room and his own bed. I guess Kestra likes to entertain overnight guests? I don't know, but it's great that Soji has a place to sleep. Deanna finally shows Picard to Thad's room. She is visibly disturbed opening the door as if she hasn't in a long time. Technically, we're not supposed to know that he's dead yet. Picard mentions the first time he met Thad, Thad was 5 years old and speaking a made-up language. Troi corrects Picard and says that was the second time Picard met Thad, and brings out a paper photograph of Picard holding a baby Thad, while Picard was still in Starfleet. As cute as this is, yet again we are going back to paper photographs, something we rarely see even today. As Picard puts the photo down, we see Thad's full name on a trophy, Thaddeus Troi Riker. So they chose to hyphenate the last name. In Beta Z tradition, the male should take the wife's name, hence why Picard called Riker Mr. Troi at the end of Nemesis. If they want to make a thing about hyphenated names, how about they give one to a main character? Back on the La Sirena, they realize they are being tailed. From the outside, the picture of the ship looks like it's only a few hundred yards away, but Rios says they are keeping at the edge of sensor range. We see Narek in a Romulan ship, and now he has a different puzzle in his hands. I have a feeling this character was developed when fidget spinners were still a thing. Remember fidget spinners? So Raffi asks Rios what kind of ship is tailing them. Rios says it's probably one of those small but fast and heavily armed scout ships, which is kind of an oxymoron. A scout ship would be small and fast, but not heavily armed. It really doesn't make sense. A ship not much bigger than a modern fighter jet could be heavily armed in the Star Trek universe. It makes even less sense that Narek could stay in such a small ship for days, maybe even weeks. He had no idea how long he'd need to follow the La Sirena when he left the cube. Apparently, despite being a Romulan ship that could easily be called a bird of prey or warbird, like any other Romulan ship, this is called a snakehead. Raffi asks if Rios can shake them. In the biggest build-up in this episode, Rios tells everyone to take a seat. When Jurati doesn't, Raffi tells her to, and Rios tells her to hold tight. I can only expect to see some crazy moves that will tax the inertial dampener so much they'll be shaking around like they did against the Romulan bird of prey. Instead, Rios just stops the ship. No one even shakes. There was no visible distress to anyone on the bridge. Why did anyone have to sit down for this? Very disappointing. More disappointing is how Dr. Jurati follows this up by mentioning how she'd like to be fun and suggest hiding in a comment that turns out to be a Gormagander, but she'd rather go home. I'm not disappointed that Jurati wants to go home, only that she brings up the Gormagander, the space whale species only ever mentioned in Discovery. Anything Picard does to remind us STD exists is a mistake. Speaking of Jurati, she takes this moment to try and convince Rios and Raffi to forget about Picard and just head back to Earth. Jurati gets her F-bomb in this episode, and more than all the rest, it's just wasted. Rios explained to Jurati she doesn't make the decision, he's working for Picard. Raffi takes Jurati to the back of the ship, saying she's going to hook Jurati up with whatever she needs. Jurati decides she needs some cake. What this does confirm, however, is dropping in and out of warp doesn't require everyone to be seated, as Rios goes back to warp as Raffi and Jurati are walking to the back, and they don't even seem to notice. Back on Nepenthe, Riker and Picard are talking outside near Riker's outdoor pizza oven that looks like a big smoker. Riker tells Picard they moved to Nepenthe because the soil has regenerative properties. Even though it isn't fully disclosed yet, they did so to help Thad, who was sick at the time. Soji and Kestra come out, and they're both speaking one of Thad's many made-up languages. Riker is confused how Soji is speaking it so fluently, and Kestra says Soji read the entire dictionary in 2 minutes. Soji takes notice of the food preparation going on, just so she can tilt her head, something I don't recall her ever doing before in the series. That head tilt was enough for Riker to guess everything about Picard's mission. That it's the Tal Shiar, not everyday Romulans. That Soji is on the run from the Tal Shiar, not Picard. And that Soji is clearly an android and related to Data, because Riker recognized the head tilt. If that sounds unbelievable, wait till you see the size of this tiny pizza that's supposed to feed 5 people. Maybe bunny corn sausage is very filling? Soji and Kestra, meanwhile, went to Troi to get some more tomatoes. They start off talking about real food and gradually transition to the full story of what happened with Thad. He had a disease called mandaxic neurosclerosis, which could have been easily cured if only an active positronic matrix was available, but because of the synth ban, no more existed. Very sad, but I find it hard to believe Riker would let his son die because of some stupid law that is obviously being broken outside the Federation anyway. But even more important, if your son has an incurable disease, why move to Nepenthe when they could have moved to the Baku planet we saw in Star Trek Insurrection? The metaphasic radiation there makes people younger. It even let Geordi grow back his eyes. What the fuck, Riker? Did you forget Geordi grew eyes? While Troi and Soji are having a serious talk, Riker and Picard walk up behind Soji. Soji is telling Troi she doesn't really trust anyone, even Picard, that this could all be a ruse. Picard makes a comment that yes, it could be, and they could be trying to torture her, which was a little out of left field. Soji gets up, is angry, and pushes Picard into Riker. Picard recovers easy enough, happy she chose not to do any real damage. And then Troi becomes the woman of the week to berate Picard, saying he had it coming. She goes on to tell Picard the Romulans tortured that girl, among other things. I don't think they did, and if they did, it was never shown on screen. Narek lied to her, used her, tried to kill her, yes, but torture? No. Torture means something. What happened to Picard by the Cardassians? That was torture. What happened to Soji was not. Kestra calls Riker back to the pizza oven because a bunch of black smoke was coming out, leaving Picard alone with Deanna. So I suppose Kestra can run around the forest with arrows, hunting venomous bunnies, but she's not allowed to open the oven? Troi tells Picard he should pretend the dinner table is the ready room of the Enterprise, but really she would have meant the conference room. That is where all the senior officers would sit around the table and solve the problem of the week. The ready room was just Picard's private office where he'd meet with people one-on-one. Riker yells over to cancel red alert. The smoke was just from a single burnt tomato. How would a random tomato burn on top of the pizza? Nothing else was ruined. Whatever. Back on the Borg cube, Hugh and Elnor are walking around the cube, and Hugh tells Elnor he's going to protect the XBs by taking the cube away from the Romulans. He needs to get to the Queen cell. Narissa comes in asking Hugh if he really thought he wasn't being watched. Also, Hugh is trying to steal the cube, which is a treaty violation, so now she's allowed to kill him. Like she couldn't have just made up that story earlier if she wanted. Elnor takes out his sword and stands in front of Hugh and says his famous, "Please, friends, choose to live," albeit in Romulan this time. Narissa says she didn't expect this, takes out a disruptor, and starts shooting like Indiana Jones versus the guy with the sword in Raiders of the Lost Ark. But unlike the guy in Raiders, Elnor and Hugh get away, at least from the initial shots. Elnor takes out at least 3 more random Romulan bad guys before Narissa tells him, again in Romulan, that this is not how the Zhat Vash fight the Qowat Milat, referring to the warrior nuns who trained Elnor. She puts her gun back in its holster and Elnor puts his sword away, even though this would be a great time to slice off her head and yell, "I'm not Qowat Milat," since, as the nun said, he never can be, since he's a dude. Instead, Narissa and Elnor fight hand to hand. Narissa pulls out 2 daggers and throws one at Hugh, which hits him in the neck. Elnor runs to Hugh and pulls the dagger from his neck. Narissa takes her gun and is about to shoot as Elnor throws the dagger back at her, but she beams away before it hits her. Hugh dies, but not before telling Elnor he needs to find an ex-Borg to activate the Queen Cell. The body count for the season is now at 46. There's a scene on the La Sirena where Dr. Jurati is eating a bunch of cake and chocolate milk, but nothing to complain about except blood sugar, so we'll move on to Nepenthe. It's finally dinner time, and Riker is serving the 5 of them from the tiny pizza. A pizza is so small I would think it would need to be cut into 6ths at most, but the math doesn't add up. I can't imagine they cut this tiny thing into 8ths, but that's the only way the math works. Riker gives Kestra 1 piece with extra bunny sausage on account she hunted the venomous horned bunny corn. Soji is given 2 because she is a guest. Riker gives Deanna a choice, and she only wants 1. Now, if this was cut into 6, there would still be 1 piece for Will and 1 for Picard, who is obviously old and can't eat more than 1 anyway, right? I mean, that's how it works, I think. But Picard is a guest, so what if he wanted 2? For that matter, what if Deanna wanted 2? As since Riker wasn't sure, I assume sometimes she has 2. You see, 6 pieces isn't enough for 5 people, and that pizza is way too small to be cut into 8ths. This is pizza, not quantum warp theory, people. I expect accuracy. Before dinner even begins, Picard is complaining Rios still hasn't contacted him. We know Nepenthe is at least 3 days away from the cube, and Picard hasn't even been there half a day, let alone a full one. Riker had already started dinner when Picard showed up. Even if a day is extremely long on Nepenthe, like 30 or even 36 hours, it's not surprising Rios isn't in combat range yet. I still don't get why Picard is worried. Picard casually says if his ship doesn't get here, he'll need a new ship. He doesn't seem to give a damn about anyone actually on the ship. Riker and Troi made it clear it will be hard for Picard to find someone with their own ship, but Kestra suggests a Captain Crandall, who she says has been everywhere from Kronos to Tychon's Rift. Kronos is obviously the Klingon homeworld, and Tychon's Rift was shown in the TNG episode Night Terrors, where Troi herself had to make telepathic contact with aliens in a dream in order to save both the Enterprise and the aliens from being destroyed in the Rift. This is the second time Kestra brings up Crandall. Riker and Troi dismiss him as a crazy old man. I guess Deanna never met him in person to get an actual reading on him. Seems something a parent should do if their teenage daughter calls him a friend. During dinner, Soji finally trusts them enough to tell them the info she told Narek, that her home world has 2 red moons and electrical storms. No one at the table has any idea where that would be, but Kestra can be seen texting under the table. Of course she texts Captain Crandall, and he knows exactly where the planet is. It's in the Qowat sector, and the planet doesn't have a name, just a number. A quick search of Memory Alpha, and I can confirm the Qowat sector has never been mentioned before in Trek. For people who were just dismissing Captain Crandall, they all immediately seem to come around and accept his answer without question. Back on the La Sirena, Rios brings Jurati to sickbay to talk to her about how the Romulans are tracking them. He tells Jurati he thinks it's Raffi, and tells her about how Raffi disappeared on Free Cloud, how she said she was leaving forever, and then came back without explanation. I assumed he was doing this to try to get Jurati to confess she herself had the tracker, because Raffi did tell Rios in private she went to meet her son, but he wanted nothing to do with her. Jurati indeed almost confesses when Raffi calls Rios to the bridge. Rios leaves Jurati alone, and she replicates a hypospray with some substance in it that the replicator warns could have neurotoxic effects depending on the species, and injects herself. She collapses and is clearly in pain and starts convulsing and foaming at the mouth. The EMH engages, and she eventually ends up in a coma. A lot of people claim this is a suicide attempt, but I must disagree. I think Jurati knows this is the only substance to dissolve the tracker she ingested earlier, and she knows it's dangerous, but hopefully not deadly. If she wanted to kill herself and had access to a replicator, frankly, she could have found a quicker, easier way to go. But the real problem happens when Rios gets back to the bridge, and Raffi informs him the ship is still being followed. Rios appears to actually distrust Raffi. Rios even says he has an idea on how they're being tracked. And Raffi jokes as long as the solution isn't shooting her out of an airlock, she's okay with it, to which Rios gets oddly serious. If Rios does suspect Raffi, then the entire scene with Raffi confessing her reason for visiting Freecloud was pointless. Also, to go back to Jurati replicating the hypospray, and this is a problem with just about every replicator in the series, they are literally just 3D printers you can buy right now off Amazon. Affiliate link in the description if you're interested. Yes, they have a cool replicator effect, but they don't even dress these things up. Another symptom of laziness or lack of budget, in my opinion. Okay, after Rios is almost done accusing Raffi of having a tracker, the EMH calls him on the bridge and informs Rios that Jurati is in a coma. Rios then rushes to sickbay. He even slides down the stairs rather than walks, and runs all 15 feet maybe. The rush is so absurd. The ship isn't that big. Also, the EMH informed him she's in a coma, not that she's dying. I've been in a coma, and yeah, it's not ideal, but it's also somewhat stable. The dash across the tiny ship is comical. Back on the Borg cube, Elnor is on the run. He is not familiar with it, obviously, and he is ducking behind anything he can find to remain out of view. Without you, he really has no chance. Or does he? In this seemingly random quest to remain hidden, he just happens to find himself staring directly at the Fenris Ranger summoning device that Seven gave to Picard in Stardust City Rag. So let's go over this incredible series of coincidences. Seven gives Picard 2 episodes back a calling card in case he is ever in need of a Fenris Ranger, before Seven goes on what should have been a suicide mission to kill all of Bjayzel's henchmen. At some point, Picard either gives it to Elnor, or Elnor takes it knowing, I guess, he'll need it more. Elnor somehow beams to the Borg cube despite clearly having never operated a transporter before. Elnor drops the device while fighting Romulans on the cube. Finally, Elnor, who seemingly forgot he ever had it, sees it dangling just inches from his face while on the run inside the cube. And double finally, he presses it and it says Fenris Rangers SOS in English. Yes, Fenris Rangers SOS. SOS, a term we've been told more than once in Trek is old, even ancient, and frankly just stupid. Anything would have been better. This one really pissed me off. So back on Nepenthe, it's finally a new day. Picard and Riker are off by the lake. Picard casually mentioned Rios finally made contact last night, so the multiple scenes about what if Rios doesn't show was all for naught. This looks like the next morning, but I'd imagine several days had to have passed, considering the distance to Nepenthe and the fact that La Sirena had to waste time dodging Narek. But it's not clear how much time has passed on Nepenthe. By the way, what about the shields Riker put up the moment he saw Picard? Do they extend all over? Do they just leave the shields? Or more than likely, did the writers just forget they existed? So Riker asks Picard about his new crew, and Picard says he'd have to say, they're decidedly motley. As they reach the lake or the stream or whatever it is, Picard asks Riker if he ever thought of shipping out again, to which Riker replies he's on active reserve, which he then adds would mean there would have to be a very good reason, as if Riker would get to choose if he wanted to return. That isn't how reserves work. In fact, active reserve seems to be a contradiction to what we see, as active would mean Riker should be in uniform serving Starfleet, not at home making bunny corn pizza. Back at the Troi Riker house, Soji wakes up to Kestra staring at her and drawing her while she slept. For someone with a counselor as a mother, Kestra doesn't seem to understand the basics of social etiquette. First the shower, now this. Good thing Soji seems to genuinely like Kestra, or this would be far more awkward. So the time finally comes for Picard and Soji to be beamed up to the La Sirena. Again, it appears as if they were only there one night, when we were clearly told by Rios Nepenthe is multiple days away at high warp. But regardless, Kestra runs out and gives Soji her broken compass as a parting gift. We were told early in this episode the compass was a gift from Captain Crandall to Kestra, and we're also led to believe that Crandall isn't all there, but highly experienced. I'm guessing this compass is also a tracking device, and Crandall is going to make a last-minute appearance at the end of the series, in their darkest moment, when all hope seems lost. We certainly won't be asked to wonder why creepy old Crandall wanted to track Kestra. Episode ends with Troi in Riker's arms, watching Picard and Soji beam away. Kestra runs in the house as the TNG theme music plays, and we see Riker give Deanna a kiss on the head, and they also turn around to go inside. The camera pans to 3 impossibly close planets in the sky. This was a rough one to review. So many problems. But with this ending, I want to feel all happy and nostalgic, and give points for callbacks for the names of the Troi Riker kids, Tychon's Rift, and the like. But under the slightest scrutiny, the entire episode falls apart. Worse, there are 2 things Star Trek Picard should never do, and they did both. First is remind any of us Discovery ever existed. Second is to forget what already happened in your own series, which itself was one of Discovery's many flaws. So after all this, I think I need to lower my score even a little bit more. New score, 3.5 out of 10. And I gave my opinions as I went today, so not much else to talk about. If you like this, please remember to comment, like, and subscribe. Also remember, sharing is caring. Qapla all, and take care.